let's talk Project 2025. Now, unfortunately, I did a video on this a while back, and it was the briefest of summations. And it was enough to terrify a lot of people. So now, what we are going to do is we are going to read through the document. I have no idea how many parts this series is going to have to be, because, if you didn't know, Project 2025 is a 920-page book that goes over the ways in which conservatives in the United States would like to usurp the United States government and turn it into, let's not mince words here, a theocratic fascist nightmare hellscape. So, yeah. This is gonna be fun. Let's do fan art real quick, and then we'll get into that. Isn't reading conservatives crazy more Vice Rhino's domain? Then Vice Rhino can read the entire thing. Or was I thinking Owen? Then Owen can read the entire thing. Or they can ask for a collab. I don't care. We're gonna go through it. Anyway. Anywho. Fan art section, very, very briefly. From Sandwolf, Suris, and Rhino's Troll Sonas. I've had too much time dealing with all of you weird homestuckers to not see this as something entirely different. But they said I've been super into trolls, and I've been looking for a reason to draw more fan art. Well, there you go. Cool. Thank you for the fan art submission, even if it's a different kind of trolls than what a lot of people in my audience probably thought going into this. That said, if you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. With that all out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the absolute madness. Let's zoom this in enough to where we can actually see this here. Like I said, this is a 920-page document, so we will be going through it as best we can. But let's see here. Telltale's too busy with arrogant gingers to go on over Project 2025. Briar Saturn says the average conservative probably doesn't know about Project 2025. You're right, but it's not the average conservative I'm worried about. It's conservative pundits. It's conservative politicians, because they do know about it. And if they don't know about it in full, they know about it enough to enact parts of it that are there to fuck over you. Those are the people I'm worried about. And maybe doing this video will be enough to kind of show that these people are crazy. The right wing in America has turned into insane, moronic dipshits. And it's probably important to go over their insane, moronic dipshittery. And anybody who wants to say, well, actually, no, I think they're actually, some of them actually have a good point about some things. No, they don't. Shut the fuck up. Stop being wrong. It's okay to admit that theocratic fascists are stupid. It's entirely understandable. But let's go ahead and take a look here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what uninformed voters don't know that is happening behind their backs. It starts out with acknowledgments saying this work, Mandate for Leadership 2025, The Conservative Promise, is a collective effort of hundreds of volunteers who've banded together in the spirit of advancing positive change for America. Our work is by no means the comprehensive compendium of conservative policies, nor is our group the exclusive cadre of conservative thinkers. The ideas expressed in this volume are not necessarily shared by all. What unites us is the drive to make our country better. First and foremost, we thank the chapter authors and contributors who gave so freely their time of their time in service to their country. When you write a book and you think that it is in service to your country, I'm already a little concerned. Why does that concern me? Well, very simply put, as somebody who grew up watching shit like Alex Jones, the idea that just doing shit like this is some form of patriotism or service to the United States is, well, it's cult-like thinking. It's just straight-up cult-like thinking. But Basically, the acknowledgments are just going over the people who helped make this giant manifesto a reality. But we are going to skip past that to go, I believe it's page 23, where it officially begins. But there is a note here that we will go over first. It says, "We want you! The 2025 Presidential Transition Project is the conservative movement's unified effort to be ready for the next conservative administration to govern at 12 p.m. noon, January 20th, 2025. Welcome to the mission. By opening this book, you are now part of it. Indeed, one set of eyes reading these pages will be those of the 47th President of the United States, and we hope every other reader will join in making the incoming administration a success. History teaches us that a president's power to implement an agenda is at its apex during the administration's opening days. To execute requires a well-conceived, coordinated, unified plan and a trained and committed cadre of personnel to implement it. In recent election cycles, presidential candidates normally begin transition planning in the late spring of the election year or even after the party's nomination was secured. That is too late. The federal government's complexity and growth advance at a seemingly logarithmic rate every 4 years. For conservatives to have a fighting chance to take on the administrative state and reform our federal government, the work must start now. The entirety of this effort is to support the next conservative president, whoever he or she may be. In the winter of 1980, the fledgling Heritage Foundation handed the president-elect Ronald Reagan the inaugural mandate for leadership. This collective work by conservative thought leaders and former governmental hands, most of whom were not part of Heritage, set out policy prescriptions agency by agency for the incoming president. This book, the book literally put all the conservative movement and Reagan on the same page, and the revolution that followed might never have been, save for this band of committed and volunteer activists. With this volume, we have gone back to the future and then some. It's not 1980. The game has changed in 2023. The long march of cultural Marxism. Oh boy, that's just another way of saying the Jews. Cultural Marxism has been a stand-in for anti-Semitism for a really fucking long time. Depraved Ambient says, so Reagan fucked the country because of the Heritage Foundation and astrology? Got it in one. The Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank that tries to pilot the United States into further fucking chaos. And yes, this shit always comes back to two people, Reagan or Nixon, every single time. You can trace a shit ton of stuff from the left to FDR and Lincoln, and you can trace a shit ton of stuff from the right to Nixon and Reagan. So, let's continue. With the quickening of the approach of January 2025, we have 2 years and one chance to get it right. Project 2025 is more than 50 and growing of the nation's leading conservative organizations joining forces to prepare and seize that day. The axiom goes, personnel is policy, and we need a new generation of Americans to answer the call and come to serve. The book is functionally an invitation for you, the reader, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, and Miss Smith, to come to Washington or support those who can. Our goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state. So, the goal is to undo America. The goal is quite literally to take everything that America has been built on, rip it apart, and build something far more theocratic in its place. Yes, this is a call for loyalist species. You are correct. Pillar 1. This volume puts in one place a consensus view of how major federal agencies must be governed, and where disagreement exists, brackets out those differences for the next president to choose a path. Pillar 2 is a personnel database that allows candidates to build their own professional profiles and our coalition members to review and voice their recommendations. These recommendations will then be collated and shared with the president-elect's team, greatly streamlining the appointment process. So, in layman's terms, they want to make a database of people that are loyalists and are willing to undermine America so that those are the only people that a president-elect will have access to for their cabinet. These are the people that will be put forward, people who are maximally able to undermine America. Pillar 3 is the Presidential Administration Academy, an online educational system taught by experts from our coalition. For the newcomer, this will explain how the government functions and how to function in government. For the experienced, we will host in-person seminars with advanced training that set the bar for what is expected of senior leadership. In Pillar 4, the playbook, we are forming an agency, teams, and drafting transition plans to move out upon the president's utterance of "So help me God." So there is a keyword in place that once the president utters it, every single lunatic who is reading this mandate will go and do something. That something will be illustrated further in the mandate. As Americans living at the approach of our nation's 250th birthday, we have been given much. As conservatives, we are as much required to steward this precious heritage for the next generation. On behalf of our coalition partners, we thank you and invite you to come join us at project2025.org. And then there's a bit about the authors, which we don't care about too terribly much, but you can pause on any of these or just read the mandate in full if you care a lot about those people. Brave Ambient says this book is basically laying out their plan to follow Germany's government in the first half of the 1940s straight into failure, which would be funny if it weren't so terrifying. Yeah, the problem is that it's a history that gets written in blood. That's the scary part about it. All right. Now we are at the beginning, correct? Once we get past the contributors. My lord, there are a lot of contributors here. A Promise to America. 44 years ago, the United States and the conservative movement were in dire straits. Both had been betrayed by a Washington establishment and were uncertain of who to trust. Both were internally splintered and strategically adrift. Worse still, at the moment of acute vulnerability and division, we found ourselves besieged by existential adversaries, foreign and domestic. The late 1970s were by any measure a historic low point for America and the political coalition dedicated to preserving its unique legacy of human flourishing and freedom. Notably, it doesn't explain why. Well, yet, anyway, we'll get to that here in a bit. But to set the stage a little bit, so when FDR took office in the United States, and basically went through the New Deal, there was a left-wing swing in the United States. This was where the Democratic Party switched into being more of a left-wing party, and what was the Republican Party had no actual grounds to stand on anymore. This was after a long-standing time of several parties, including the Whigs, attempting to de-seat the Republican Party, because after the age of Lincoln, it became very, very hard to gain a foothold in the U.S. government without being a Republican. Then, after FDR, the opposite happened. The Democratic Party became the one that was really hard to unseat. It became very difficult to enfranchise voters when so many of them wanted to vote, well, for Democrats. So, the Southern strategy was enacted. The Southern strategy was an effort to get racist white Southern voters who had been disenfranchised after Lincoln took office and didn't feel like they had a party anywhere anymore. The Democrats had now moved so far to the left compared to what the Republicans had been that it was a progressive party or a progressive party, with one of these parties being far more popular than the other. The Southern strategy is what flipped the Republican Party over to, let's go ahead and call them what they are, evil fucking Nazis. This is because there was a, like I said, racist white voter base in America that needed a place to cast their votes. And instead of trying to reform that racist white voter base into more functional members of society that weren't pieces of horse crap on the bottom of your shoe, it was instead a better idea for these Republicans to, well, let's not put it nicely, grab those voters and milk them for all they were worth. This is why the Republican Party right now, despite being very anti-union, has a bunch of people who end up being union workers voting for them. Right-wing unions are a thing because most people who work in, say, construction and other areas that need to be unionized in general, if they are not part of a Hollywood union or a teachers union, tend to be very, very right-wing oriented. You see this in the police, you see this in construction, you see this in several blue-collar working fields. This flip allowed Republican politicians to convince voters who need institutions who are ostensibly left-wing, like unions, to vote against their best interests. It's a terrifying thing that I believe I've done a video on already, but if you want me to, I'll do another full video on the Southern strategy if I have not done one already. But like I said, the idea was simple. Grab Republican voters, or grab voters who didn't have anywhere else to go because they were racist bottom feeders in society, and give them a place to vote. The progressives had taken over the Democrats, and the Republicans were not the popular progressives anymore, so they became the conservatives. But that wasn't enough. Nixon was not very popular against Kennedy, and so they needed something else. The culmination of the Southern strategy was the transition from the Nixon style of Republican presidency to the Reagan style of Republican presidency. Reagan was an actor. This was a person perfectly poised to be the leader of any movement, because this is a person who had charisma, despite the fact that Reagan basically lost his fucking mind in the middle of his presidency. Ravi posted a thing as well. I'll go ahead and check that here in a second. But anyway, despite the fact that Reagan literally lost his mind and Nancy Reagan had to do most of the heavy lifting for him in his presidency, all that mattered was that he had the charisma to carry himself forward. Kind of the opposite of Joe Biden in this way. While the Democrats would typically put the person forward who had the best look on policy or worked best within the confines of what the Democratic Party would want, the Republican Party would put people who were insanely popular forward and operate them from behind the scenes. Now, this isn't to say this doesn't happen with Democratic people as well, with Democratic politicians, but starting with Reagan, you can see this shift to people who have very high levels of popularity and riding on them for their presidencies. You have Reagan into Bush Sr., and Bush Sr. being very popular during his campaign with his read my lips, no new taxes, despite what he actually did in his presidency, led very well into another Bush presidency when we got George Bush Jr. And George Bush Jr. has, despite his inadequacies, he does have a level of charisma, and you can't deny that when you look at the way his character has been reformed over the years with going on Ellen and all of that. The dude definitely functioned as a poster child for Republicans. Being into Trump, the dude oozes charisma. The people who don't like Trump are the people who know enough about Trump to know they shouldn't like him. But people who don't have that get swept up in his words. It's seen at Trump rallies. It's seen generally amongst Southern populations. The Republican MO is put faces forward and operate in the back to undermine the country. And it's proven fairly effective at this point so far. But let's go ahead and move in. And again, like, there are people who are going to do the whole, like, Trump doesn't really have charisma. Look at all this. No. You know enough about Trump so his charisma checks don't work on you. But his charisma checks work on normies. Today in America, the conservative movement is enduring an era of division and danger akin to the 1970s. Now, as then, our political class has been discredited by wholesale dishonesty and corruption. Look at America under the ruling and cultural elite today. Inflation is ravaging family budgets. Drug overdose deaths continue to escalate, and children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism, with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. Now, despite the fact that most of these books about gender had been in school libraries for decades already, nothing's actually invaded. It's all been here. It's all been here the entire time. But you can kind of see where this document is going. So this sounds like a wizard making a speech. Oh, we can do that. Overseas, a totalitarian communist dictatorship in Beijing is engaged in a strategic, cultural, and economic Cold War against America's interests, values, and people. I will got the Ministry of Magic of all Muggle-borns. That's all you really have to do to make it sound like a wizard is there. Just add in rowling racism, and it works. So let's go ahead and get another thing out of the way here. China's not communist. They may be led by the Communist Party, but that would no more make China communist than having Bernie Sanders being the president of the United States would make the United States socialist. China actually has an economic system called state capitalism. They have capitalism like we have here, but instead of more individual and private freedoms within that capitalism, a lot of that ends up being partially, if not fully, owned by the state. This is why buyouts from companies like Tencent are so terrifying, because they are effectively buyouts from the Chinese government, not just another video game company. It's just capitalism with the government in more control, and not in the sense that they're regulating prices to make affordability for their people more achievable, in the sense that they are the biggest stockholder at the company table. That's what that is. That's what state capitalism is. Instead of your regular mom and pops having more power, and granted they don't have enough power here, it's one more level of hierarchical control over what we already experience here. Depraved says the biggest victims of the CCP are the Uyghurs and the rest of the civilian population in China, not affiliated with the party. Yeah, their social credit system fucks up your life for life, literally. It's, again, what we see in China governmentally. This has nothing to do with the citizens. The citizens, as far as I can tell, are fine people. It's just propaganda's a thing. Just like citizens in Russia are fine people, but propaganda's a thing. When it comes to China, the biggest issue is the level of government control and how much you have to be in line with what the government wants. Project 2025 sees that and goes, oh, what if we did that too? Anyway, all while globalist elites, a globalist is another code word for Jew, globalist elites in Washington awaken only slowly to that growing threat. Moreover, low-income communities are drowning in addiction and government dependence. So, government dependence is not actually a bad thing. Welfare states are not actually a bad thing. So whenever somebody tends to be really down, like really angry at welfare and dependent on government institutions, they tend to also be very, very ableist. The reason for that is people who tend to need government assistance are people who otherwise cannot work in most industries, whether it's from a disability or from some kind of mental handicap or something happened in life that made it to where they cannot function in society as normal. By removing those government programs, by getting rid of governmental assistance, you don't actually let those people integrate back into society and become hardworking members. You just have more homeless people on the streets. You just have more people who can't afford to live anymore. That's all that happens there. I don't like when people fight so hard against a welfare or a nanny state, because all a welfare or a nanny state is a government that recognizes that it has a duty to its citizens. We all live in a society and we all pay taxes in some way, shape, or form, and God forbid those taxes go into alleviating shit for the working class. And we all benefit from that. Do you not like dealing with homeless people peddling for your change whenever you're going to the gas station or walking down the street in a populated city? More government assistance would solve that problem. You would see fewer homeless people and they would annoy you less. If they had governmental housing, if they had more government assistance. Do you not like how broken our current healthcare system is? Government assistance helps with that as well, making it so where everybody has access to not only the education to engage in the nursing and doctor and pharmaceutical fields, and also have the ability to afford these things. It makes things easier for you. You don't get nightmarishly high wait times. You get higher wait times than normal. The wait times you would expect if everybody could pay for healthcare. Curia says, hate welfare states, but government subsidies for big businesses are okay. And that's the same thing, just with, you know, not people. Clueless Expert says, how many of the folks behind this document are wealthy enough to not see most of those problems regularly? Probably all of them. But let's continue. Contemporary elites have even repurposed the worst ingredients of the 1970s radical cheek to build the totalitarian cult known today as the Great Awakening. The fucking what? The Great Awakening? That's so fucking cringy. This is where you get everybody freaking out about woke shit. The Great Awakening. Now I just have the theme song from The New Norm stuck in my head, or Mr. Burcham, or any of the other right-wing comedies. And now, as then, the Republican Party seems to have little understanding about what to do. Most alarming of all, the very moral foundations of our society are at peril. The moral foundations they're talking about, by the way, are trans people existing, gay people existing. If we were in the 50s, they would be arguing about how black people shouldn't be able to drink from the water fountains. You know, a great society. Yet, students of history will note that notwithstanding all those challenges, the late 1970s proved to be the moment when the political right unified itself and the country and led the United States to historic political, economic, and global victories. The Heritage Foundation is proud to have played a small but pivotal role in that story. It was in the early 1979, amid stagflation, gas lines, and the Red Army's invasion of Afghanistan, the nadir of Jimmy Carter's days of malaise, that Heritage launched the Mandate for Leadership project. Jimmy Carter, by the way, apparently a pretty fucking cool guy. He actually, like, late into his 80s and 90s, still went out and built homeless shelters for people. Do you know how fucking cool you have to be an ex-president with a guaranteed salary for the rest of your life and go out and build homeless shelters for people? That's fucking rad. Anywho, we brought together hundreds of conservative scholars and academics across the conservative movement. Together, this team created a 20-volume, 3,000-page governing handbook containing more than 2,000 conservative policies to reform the federal government and rescue the American people from Washington's dysfunction. It was a promise from the conservative movement to the country, confident, specific, and clear. Mandate for Leadership was published in January 1981, the same month Ronald Reagan was sworn into his presidency. By the end of that year, more than 60% of its recommendations had become policy, and Reagan was on his way to ending the stagflation reviving American confidence and prosperity, and winning the Cold War. The Cold War, mind you, was a war with no fighters. We could pretend we won the Cold War at any point. I'm sorry, but the Cold War was a time of rampant paranoia across two countries and not a lot of people actually doing anything. What was the victory condition of the Cold War? Because nothing happening was already happening. There was a lot of nothing happening. You could say that we're still in a Cold War now with Russia, dancing around NATO. But, you know, whatever. Red Joker says there wasn't really a winner in the Cold War besides everyone living without a nuclear winter. Yeah, how is that any different to now with Putin? But don't worry, we won. The bad news today is that our political establishment and cultural elite have once again driven America toward decline. The good news is that we know the way out, even though the challenges today are not what they were in the 70s. Conservatives should be confident that we can rescue our kids, reclaim our culture, revive our economy, and defeat the anti-American left at home and abroad. We did it before, and we'll do it again. So let me parse out that for a little bit for people who speak normalies instead of whatever the hell this is. So when they're saying rescue our kids, they're meaning stop our kids from being gay or trans. They're meaning turn your kids into bigots. When they say reclaim our culture, they mean make our culture purely Christian. Go back to shaming women for, well, being anything other than a stay-at-home, barefoot and pregnant housewife. Go back to the days where we were able to beat our kids violently in many cases. Go back to those good old days. For conservatives, the good old days are almost always somewhere about 50 years ago. Now, lo and behold, this entire document is about the 70s. We are in 2024. About 50 years ago. Says, "Seems in bad shape. It was a bad joke, but what Dave said." Let's see here. Better mental state than Biden to boot. Quick note, Jimmy Carter only served one term and still eligible to run again. It would be nice to have him, but he's a bit older than even Biden. Cthulhu says, anti-American left, this the only place where the original revolutionary spirit has any home. So, you gotta remember, the anti-American left tend to be anti what America stands for now. Not anti-America. I am not part of the anti-American left. I'm very pro-American. I'm very pro-America. Because I think that despite how fucked up our country is, we can do better. We should do better. We can become a more inclusive nation. We can become a less imperial nation. We can become a nation that is truly a home for American citizens. And we can become a nation that makes it easier to become an American citizen. There's nobody you want in America more than somebody who wants to live in America. Those are the true American citizens. People who want to fucking live here. I think making the world a better place, for where I'm standing, involves making America a better place. That's a better place for conservatives, a better place for liberals, a better place for leftists, a better place for white people, black people, Asian people, trans people, Mexican people, maybe gay people. I'm kidding. Yes, gay people as well. Everyone. Unfortunately, the big divide a lot of times seems to be, we need to make the world a better place for the white people. That means making it a worse place for the blacks. When turns out if we just do things like healthcare reform and funding public libraries and making sure the education system isn't fucking broken, we actually make a better world for everyone. When we make education available for everyone, they go on to take on jobs that they enjoy, jobs that they want, and they don't get stuck in the sunk cost fallacy of, well, I spent $30,000 at a college, I guess I'm stuck in this career. The document then goes on to say, this is the duty history has put before us and the standard by which our generation of conservatives will be judged, and we should not want it any other way. The legacy of mandate for leadership, and indeed the entire Reagan revolution, is that if conservatives want to save the country, we need a bold and courageous plan. This book is the first step in that plan. So, the Heritage Foundation is once again facilitating the work of doing so. As our dozens of partners and hundreds of authors will attest, this book is the work of the entire conservative movement. As such, the authors express consensus recommendations already forged, especially along 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future. Restore the family as the centerpiece of the American life and protect our children. Again, protect our children from what? They have to make up an enemy every single few generations. So, once upon a time, back when Reefer Madness came out, the enemy was marijuana. And then later we found out that marijuana is not so far removed from, say, alcohol, to be treated any differently than, again, say, alcohol. The most terrible thing about marijuana is how bad it fucking smells. Outside of that, it's just alcohol. Again, it's an inebriant that even has fewer side effects than what alcohol does. But don't worry, we said alcohol was bad too once. It led to NASCAR. I'm not even kidding. Right now, the thing that is attacking your children is trans people, according to the people who wrote this document. And after we're done going over these 4 pillars, we're going to look at some things said by the people who wrote this document, the Heritage Foundation, to show kind of some perspective as we close out of the first part of this. There's going to be a lot more episodes on this in the coming weeks, because there has to be. There's just so much here. They then say we want to dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. So, what that sounds like is we are going to get rid of all of the rules and regulations that make your life horrible. But the reality is regulations are a good thing. Do you want to know the reason why it's so safe to eat at restaurants? Regulations. Do you want to know why it's so safe to buy a toy for your kid? Regulations. Do you want to know why it's so safe to drive down the road at night during the day on a bridge? Regulations. We regulate things that are used by everyone. We regulate the kinds of plastic allowed in your kids' toys. We regulate the kinds of food dyes allowed in your food. We regulate the kinds of insulation allowed in your home. And this stops you from having something like asbestos giving you cancer. This stops you from having certain things in your food that cause shit tons of long-term problems. This stops us from selling radioactive toys, which we used to do. Regulations are not a bad thing. It's when stupid regulations get enacted. The goal is not to deregulate everything. That's a moron and a child's choice. The right thing to do is recognize where regulations are needed and enforce them there, as opposed to deregulating industries where several of these regulations were literally written in blood. But let us continue. When we talk about self-governance of the American people, this would also mean getting rid of several bloated political programs. Several of these programs do things like, I don't know, provide health care to the elderly. Things that aren't done well enough, could be much better, but are certainly not done to any, good extreme right now. Dismantling your administrative state, as much as it sounds like a cool thing, we'll probably find later in the document means getting rid of several bits of infrastructure that are required for many Americans who are not as able-bodied as the rest to live. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. So, our borders are not really at threat right now. Putin's threatened a bunch of shit and hasn't done anything. China can threaten a bunch of shit and it hasn't done anything. Who are our bordered problems? The only other borders we have are Canada and Mexico. And I don't think that we're too worried about the Mexicans. They don't do a whole lot to threaten us, not really, and we're not really worried about the snow Mexicans either, because if they did anything to us, they would just apologize and, I don't know, burn the White House again. So, I don't think we have to worry about our immediate neighbors, and I'm going to be honest, I don't see us having to worry as much about Putin and China right now because we are one of the main global superpowers. It's a bad idea to fuck with us. Anubian says, hey, I gave y'all credit for burning down the White House, and I bet you'll do it again. Then, the last part is, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. And yet, everybody who is in favor of this document wants to remove access to HRT from trans people, which would literally be taking away their freedoms to be themselves. But okay. Titan Uranus says, did you just call Canadians snow Mexicans? Yes, and I'll do it again. What makes these 4 pieces of the conservative promise so valuable to the next president is that they cut through the superficial distractions and focus on the moral and foundational challenges America faces in this moment of history. There was one of the secrets of conservative success in the Reagan era, one our generation should emulate. As in the late 1970s, Americans today experience the failures of political and cultural elites in countless ways. The job market and in the grocery store checkout lines, on the streets and in our schools, in the media and within our institutions. And you can bet, that's not me, and you can bet your ass we're not going to be specific on what any of that means because we want you to insert whatever you think you should be paranoid about here because that makes things far easier for us. These daily dysfunctions are not innumerable problems, but innumerable manifestations of a few core issues. In 1979, the threats we faced were the Soviet Union, the socialism of 1970s liberals. Liberals. You know liberalism is capitalist, right? You know that liberals are capitalists, right? Like, that's what makes liberalism a distinct ideology from socialism or communism, is that liberalism is not socialist. If somebody is a liberal, they're not a socialist. They're not a communist. It's a distinct ideology. Jesus Christ. A communist wants, well, abolition of money. To each according to their ability, from each to each according to their needs, from each according to their ability. A communist wants to remove things like money from a society. A socialist does not want to remove things like money from a society. They want to increase the power that workers have in a society. They want more mom and pop stores. They want more unions. They want fewer Walmarts, and they want fewer ununionized Starbuckses. What they want is more SAG-AFTRAs. What they want is more locals. What they want is more people coming together and democratically figuring out how best to run the company that they all collectively work at, as opposed to one CEO telling them how it's going to be for the rest of their lives, despite the fact that he hasn't worked a day in your fucking shoes. And you can tell that to John. Because John is a stupid fucking CEO, and he hasn't worked your job. He got it because he probably sucked somebody else's cock. I'm sorry. You can tell which one of these ideologies I care more about. A liberal, on the other hand, is okay with capitalism on the whole. A liberal is okay with the amount of capital that floats around and creates everything that we have today as a problem. This does not mean that a liberal is not your ally, because a liberal is generally far more okay with regulating industry than they are with deregulating industry. That type of mindset would be called libertarianism. But anyways. In 1979, blah, 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 Reagan defeated these beasts by ignoring their tentacles and striking at their hearts. His approach to the Cold War, we win and they lose. His economic agenda, the human dignity of work and its many rewards. His platform in the culture war, the community of values embodied in these words: family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. Notably, these are all platitudes and don't actually mean anything. This book and Project 2025 as a whole will arm the next conservative president with the same kind of strategic clarity, but for a new age. And before we get into the promises here, the promises will be the next video that we do on Project 2025. Like I said, this is going to be a very long series, and I'm going to make a playlist in my channel so that we can go over each and every one of these so that you have a comprehensive guide on all of it. It's going to take a while, and hopefully I'll be able to get it done before the presidential cycle. But if any of you have noticed, my throat has been getting ravaged more and more throughout this particular video. And it's starting to hurt a lot to talk. As a quick addendum in editing, I completely forgot to go over this part in the video, but let's go over some of the things the Heritage Foundation has decided to throw out there on the internet there. Leader of the pro-Trump 2025 project suggests there will be a new American revolution. But the Second American Revolution will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. So, you know, if you aim a gun at somebody and then you say, if you do X or Y, I'll pull the trigger, and then you blame them when they do X or Y, which may be breathing or sleeping, whatever the fuck it is, being trans in the Heritage Foundation's case, that doesn't mean that they are the ones at fault for the blood. You held the trigger. You had the gun. Anyway, there. I had to throw that amendment in there. Thank you for watching, and we will get into more of this in a later video. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.